a good program to you, and I would seek your permission to record the event this evening, because that's been requested from a number of people who cannot join us today, and they really want to see more, hear more, support more, act more in this space of race discrimination. So I really don't want to be excluding anyone, so I've agreed to record the event. Thank you so much. So the program for today, in a few minutes, we'll hear from the RCN president, Sheila Subrani, who is on a journey in Devon, but is taking 5 minutes to set some context for us. We will then hear from Hilary Garrett, who's NHSI director, around the work that they are doing in relation to addressing the issue of racial discrimination in the NHS and wider. Carol Cooper, many of you will know Carol with the work that she does, and her background in equality, diversity and inclusion, especially focusing on race. We'll do a session for us, and then we'll hear from Wayne Farah, who is going to talk about, in relation to language, looking back and how we move forward. If you have any questions during that time, we'll let space for you to ask your questions, put it in the chat, and or raise your hands. We're happy to hear your voices, but please be aware that we want to hear everybody's voices in this space. So be respectful of the time that we have in order to hear as many voices as we can. There'll be time for a little bit of a question and answer before we go back to Stephanie, Ferguson and Alan to talk about the recent case that's been in the media around from the RCN, and then we'll finish off with a Q&A for you to interact. If that's okay with everybody, I think Sheila should be ready to go. So I will hand over to Sheila to give us an RCN perspective on where she is. Thank you, Sheila.
Hello, good evening, and thank you to Bruno and Joan and all the speakers this evening who are speaking. And I'd like to give you my warm welcome to the audience as the Royal College of Nursing President. My name is Sheila Subrani. Today we are working in the RCN context, so we're working to become an anti-racist union and learning from the recent CAR review and focusing on the future on moral principles and values. And these moral principles and values should unite all of us as a nursing profession and as members of the RCN as well. So of any union, in fact. The importance of language when addressing the race issue is to really understand the context and content of language is really vital to actually having these discussions. It's really important not to be dismissive, no matter how trivial the issue may sound to each other. We come from different sides, from different lived experiences, and it's very important to be really supportive and compassionate on this journey. And my vision as president is that I would like to see the Royal College of Nursing members united over this, moving it forward and bringing it about a unique cultural change from within that extends right across to support our nurses in their workplaces, our nursing workforce, but also our reps and our stewards who are out there on the ground. So I'd like this to go as far reaching as possible. And I hope you enjoy this event and that you get a lot out of it. Thank you very much, Bruno. It's been lovely to be able to present to you all, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Sheila, thank you so much for taking the time out of your journey to be able to share a couple of minutes with us today. We hear a message loud and clear, and the need for us to unite in the fight against racism right across the health and social care sector. So we will support and join you in that fight as much as possible, not just as those in the RCN membership, but beyond that, I think, with our stakeholders that's attending here today and those who are not RCN members. But I think the fight needs to go on. So I'm now going to hand over to Hilary. Hilary, I've got your presentation ready, so let me know when you want to change slides.
Thanks, Bruno, and hello, everybody. Nice to be here, and I'm delighted to be here on this important week and of course this important virtual conference. My name's Hilary Garrett, as hopefully you can see there, and I'm one of the Deputy Chief Nursing Officers for England, and I have this title that is that goes with it. My portfolio is around professional and system leadership for nurses, and I'll explain why this anti-racism work has came into that portfolio in 2019 in a short while. So I'm here today to be sharing with you some of the work we've been doing across the NHS Confederation, across the Nursing Midwifery Council, and of course with NHS England and others, to consider. The work has been centred around considering what practical action registrants, nurses and midwives can take to actually sharpen and deepen and even change. What can we change in our everyday practice to make a difference to the lives of patients and communities and colleagues from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds? Now, I say this practical action because for years, we've actually looked at the data, we've discussed the issues about why our colleagues, in particular from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, have poorer work-based experiences with less access to opportunities that enhance their careers when compared to the white counterparts. So we know this, and we're quite good at discussing it, less at taking collective action at scale. So if we just go on to the next slide, please, Bruno, I just want to start with the journey that led us to developing an anti-racism resource. Now, I sort of came into this space formally, i.e. equality and diversity for nurses came into my portfolio just at the start of the pandemic, actually. It was February 2020. And a couple of weeks before lockdown, and I didn't know how many Black and ethnic minority nurses we had at a senior level. Looked on ESR and I was shocked to find out we only had about 147 Black and ethnic minority nurses at band 8B and above. So I managed to track them down and ask them to come to what we called a symposium in Birmingham, and I'll always remember that day. And we asked the question, you know, what has affected your career development over the years? And the stories came out in terms of their lived experience of having their careers squashed, of not being able to develop, of feeling undervalued, and the stories of racism in practice and lack of anti-racism practice. And it was only 2 weeks after that where we had the lockdown for the global emergency, which was COVID. And it was early on, as you know, during those COVID weeks, as nurses and midwives started to lose their lives, that we knew that there was a disproportionate amount of Black and ethnic minority colleagues in the NHS losing their lives. So we started, with the help of our strategic advisory group in England, holding national listening events. And we held 4 or 5 of them across the country, attended by hundreds and hundreds of staff. And this was the start of the journey, actually, as we started to listen to how people were feeling and what they were experiencing at this most crucial time in everybody's career. But the experience was really exemplified in terms of all sorts of things: exclusion, fear, not feeling part of the team, being treated differently to white counterparts, and the exemplified examples of racism in the workplace as well. Now, what this did lead to was the first ever Chief Nursing Officer, Chief Midwifery Officer action plan for England. And these action plans were driven by 7 regional teams across England that developed their own national plans, their own local plans, sorry. But the whole country started to come together each month for a steering group that drove these national action plans through the 7 regions. And we had in that 2 national flagship programmes. One facilitated by Carol Cooper, who's with us, I think, in join us here today in the audience and here to speak, Getting to Equity programme. And the flagship programme I want to talk to you today about is the Anti-Racism Guide that we've now produced. We produced that, we published it in November with an agreement with Free Council, with the Confederation, with NHS England. So that's a storyline in terms of how this came about. If we could just go to the next slide. For those of you not familiar about how we're organised in terms of NHS England, we're organised into 7 regions. And as I say, each 7 regions have their own regional action plans that are coordinated centrally, but these flagship programmes, each of the regions have contributed to and have those as part of their plans, and the Anti-Racism Guide as being one of them. If we go to the next slide, we can see how each region there's some rhyme and reason, and there's some common structure to their action plans. And these are the 5 themes that we've addressed in the action plans, all coming from the conversations, the listening events that we had through the symposium just before lockdown, but during the early days of the pandemic as well. There's a big theme there about protecting staff. And this is the voice of the lived experience about how people felt very early on during COVID, particularly around feeling safe at work, and then going home to their families as well, and making their families feel safe. And one big thing that really jumped out here was the PPE equipment and the fit testing of masks, and how one size just doesn't fit all, and how there were particular requirements for people and staff from ethnic minority backgrounds, and particular requirements for how those risk assessments were taken, were carried out in relation to PPE. So we managed to get some guidance out to the system and standardise that across the country. Engagement with staff and networks. This was around having multiple events and webinars to listen to Black and ethnic minority staff, to listen about their experiences, to inform the actions we were taking. And we had some great engagements. And one of the clear outputs from that was the development of a guide for our international recruited nurses, particularly those new to the UK. And through that, we shared details about their employee rights and responsibilities, particularly during the pandemic, and we've built on that work going forward. The next thing was representation in decision making, and this was about promoting the voice of our Black and ethnic minority staff in senior forums in which policy and decisions were being made. And this was achieved via various initiatives that we've been running. We have some flagship fellowship programs and professional development programs. And one of the things we do here is we don't run those programs unless we have good representation from our Black and ethnic minority staff. And there is real benefit in actually, promoting these development opportunities, and actually going out to our networks and saying, why aren't people applying for these? What is it that's stopping people from our ethnic minority networks from applying, and tapping people on the shoulders. And I ran a big fellowship program where over 54% of people were from Black and ethnic minority staff in the first year, and now it's 45% in the second year. And each of those members of staff have gone on to get promotions. We started employing advisors nationally. At this stage, I have Antoinette Jackson, a very senior nurse, one of the most senior nurses in the country, who works in my team. And we had Jenny Kagua as well, our first Filipino nurse, who was giving us some very good advice and direction, particularly during the COVID years. And Jenny now works in the international recruitment space and does a really good, vital job there. Rehabilitation and recovery. This work included scoping the number of Black and ethnic minority staff we had trained as freedom to speak up guardians. There was a big gap there, and we really worked hard to get more staff to train in these roles so we can create much better, safer spaces for colleagues to come forward regarding any concerns they might have as well. And we've really promoted the importance of our multiple networks that we've now got, for increasing networks that we've got now for our Black and ethnic minority colleagues. We've got the Jabali networks for men. We've got the executive networks for our Black and ethnic minority director colleagues. There's all sorts of networks that our internationally trained staff really value and use as well. There must be about 20 or 25 networks that are really important in relation to rehabilitation and recovery and linking and for psychological safety as well. And in terms of communication and media, we've ensured that the lines of communication very much open at regional level, and also we've got a future NHS webpage that acts as a central repository for informing, and a central repository for putting all the action that's coming out of the regional action plans as well. Now, the next slide, if we can move on to that, so I remember what it is we get into one of the flagship programmes, and this was the development of the anti-racism in professional practice guide. As I say, this went live in October, and the work started, if we can go to the next slide, please. This work started with a conversation very early on, John. I mean, I don't know if you want to come in here, that we had in relation to the data that was just so evident. They've got some data there that we all knew was clear. That we'll just take one of these examples. 21% of all staff and healthcare workers who died. Sorry, I can't. I've gone all fuzzy. 21% of staff were BAME, and 63% of those who died, 63% of those, I've got this right, during COVID who died were BAME. Yeah. Yeah, and I know we. Yes, and I suppose what we're trying to get to, because I know our time is a bit short, is that this is just a start, isn't it, Hilary, with the NMC trying to push them, and they've been willing participants to try and make sure that we make a start with the guide, the anti-racism guide, but actually we need to do a lot more. Yeah. And the spotlight as well on, all the national and international events were just staring us in the face in terms of, we can't sit back and just talk about this anymore. So having this conversation with Joan is back. There's quite a bit of work going on in the space of what do anti-racism organisations look like? Well, how do we answer the question of what does good anti-racist practice look like in everyday practice, and how can we link this to our professional code of conduct so we become more active in this space and not passive? So if we get through to the next slide, which is slide 7, and this gives a bit more context in terms of, there was a paucity of work done in relation to the individual registrant's competencies to be anti-racist. What competencies do you need? Being a good anti-racist practitioner doesn't happen by osmosis. You have to really look at the competencies and go out and get those competencies. And in doing that, how can we increase personal responsibility and adoption of anti-racism practice amongst nurses and midwives? And even more so, how do we start to understand how institutional racism affects individual practice and actually puts people in breach of their professional code? How does institutional racism affect that? And then I suppose we have this exploration of making explicit what anti-racism practice looks like, but aligning this to our regulatory codes. And therefore, if we do that, we make it explicit in terms of how have we demonstrated anti-racism practice when we do our revalidation as well. This has always been important, but even more so now, because we are managing to recruit our internationally trained colleagues to the tune of 6,000 a month, which is phenomenal, and coming to work in England. That's just last year. So how important it is for them to feel valued, involved, and an equal part of our workforce.
I think we've got 2 minutes. They're telling me we've got 2 minutes left.
So the next slide goes on to just look at the resource itself, and I'll leave you to read the resource, but it really goes through challenging racism in terms of identifying, not being a passive observer, what it is to make people feeling cared for and really belong, understanding particularly the racial fatigue and the silence that damages the whole experience of racism, challenging leadership and anti-racism practices, part of good leadership, as Joe mentioned, and what does authentic inclusion actually mean? If we go on to the next slide. It's very practical. As I said, I won't repeat this, but this is about taking us through witnessing, experiencing and leading anti-racism practice. That's what gets that's what's at the heart of the resource. And then finally, the final slide is an ask. Actually, please do use this resource. It's a quick read, but it's not about reading it. It's actually using it as a tool for discussion, a tool for exploration, and a tool you can use for people's personal development plans and your own development plan as well, and thinking, what can we do differently today? It's about having those brave discussions, some of those discussions we're having today, create safe spaces to listen to what people think and feel, and allow people to think and feel in a safe space. But it's about talking about it regularly and consistently, from board to floor as well, and influencing not the people that you manage, but the people that are around you that you can influence as well. And I think that is the final slide. So we want to ask you to promote this guide as much as you possibly can, and please use it in your own practice as well. And thank you to Joan and Bruno, you've been part of this work as well, and thank you to the NMC for walking along this journey, which sometimes it hasn't been an easy journey to get the guide out of the door, but we did it. So thank you.
Thank you, Hilary, for your presentation. And I'll just hold you there for a second. I know we're tight for time and trying to get as much in as possible. And there is a Q&A coming. The team is managing the guide. There's a couple of things that just stand out for me that I just want to tease back at you and Joan, which is the area of sustainability, because too often in this space, we see a piece of work starting and it's crucial that it runs over a period of time. So I think the question I would ask is the guarantee of sustainability over a period of time. And secondly, I hear and I see the language that you're using is really explicit to racism and institutional discrimination, not institutional, trying to address the institutional stuff that people have been talking about for many years. I just want you to come back on that a little bit, how important it is for you.
So sustainability, and John, you can come into that as well. You know, this is a piece of a much bigger jigsaw, isn't it? So this isn't to replace anything that people have got, but it has to be part of a much bigger package. And I think if we can carry this through, you know, we are a credible workforce, and there's a lot of us. And I think if we can role model this for other professions and just demonstrate how small things can make a massive difference to people's experience. And I think, you know, having these conversations, talking regularly, building it into people's development plans. If we get this right now and align it to our code, we use this as part of pre-registration. We won't even need this guide, you know, 3 to 5 years' time, because the people coming through the education system, nurses and midwifery, we should be practicing our anti-racist skills from day one, from the minute we enter university to become a nurse or a midwife. So it's about really running the course of this. And if the narrative, this is a public health issue, but this is a safety issue. So as we talk about sustainability of patient safety, this needs to be treated on the lines as of equal importance to that. You know, how do we maintain patient safety each and every day?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I would just
want to take that.
Yeah, I would just say briefly, a really wise person now sitting in the House of Lords told me, nothing we get is without a fight. Mm. Be prepared for the fight. So when we talk about where is the support, where is the, how do we differentiate between ourselves? When you're impacted by racism, the divide and rule is real. So let's just be aware of that. And we're going to do some work on the language of racism and where we can get distracted or where we can really be in a fight for right. Those supporters who are also in the fight for right, this is how we'll get anything. So I'm not going to answer the question about, where we will get more support. We have to fight for it. And that's what this event is about. But we'll take more questions later because I'm aware time is short. Yeah, but Hilary, I want to thank Hilary to lead. You will think that document is like a little piece. And what is this? The fight to even get the words racism written down, all the legislation that's already there. The fight to get that is not an easy one, but it's a start. And with you, we have to do a lot more. So I just wanted to thank you for that, Hilary.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. And yeah, I hear your message loud and clear, Joan, around the leadership I think Hilary has shown in this space. We'll be able to get this work moving and get it built into the system. So our next speaker is, Hilary mentioned earlier on, is Carol. So if we can bring Carol online for us, please, it would be great. So hello, Carol, and welcome.
Hi, Bruno. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, we understand that today's session is around the use of language and how important language is for us to be able to identify discrimination, fight discrimination, and all the context around how we move it on through our policies and strategies and creating a safe space. But that language is ever changing. It's always moving. How do we keep up with that? What advice would you give us? And what's the landscape, I suppose, do you see in this space that we can really work with it to make it better in addressing, using the right language to better address the issues that we see?
So I think it was Audre Lorde that said the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so recognizing that water follows form, language is really important in terms of shaping the environment in which anti-racism takes place. I think years ago, certainly from my perspective as a person from the global majority, we called racism what it was. It was racism. And different languages come into this space. I think people have come into this space, into the business of race equality, not always understanding it. And some of that narrative, some of that language has changed. Some language from academic places has come into the fore. And I think one of the challenges we have in the NHS is we do something called pinching with pride. And what that means is that people get a hold of language without fully understanding what language means and start utilizing that and giving themselves an air of competence that they don't actually have. And I think that's where we find the most challenge, where the rubber hits the road. When people don't understand the concept, when they don't understand the experience, and I'm talking to both people who have lived experience of racism and people who have lived experience of perhaps perpetuating racism. I've experienced racism all my life, but I didn't always understand it. And it's taken me time and energy and effort to get to a point of understanding that is an expertise in and of itself. And so we find ourselves reaching, or people find themselves reaching, leaders find themselves reaching for the nearest person from the global majority in an attempt to understand what this thing is, as if everybody has a PhD in race equity. Sometimes when you're the victim of something, you only understand the pain, but you don't understand the thing that's hurting you. And so enabling this thing to be led by expertise is really important, because sometimes our organizational structures do not put people who understand race equity at a position where they have influence. And so you can be given all of that advice, the understanding behind the language, but people don't want that. They want the language, but they don't want the improvement. And therefore you get what we call an illusion of inclusion, but not actual inclusion, not real improvement, not real equity. And so understanding who is creating the language, who is using the language, who understands the language is really, really important, because there are a number of different words that have crept into this space. Some of the words minimize what racism actually is and takes the human element out of it. But I like words like global majority because it makes me feel differently. And, you know, Maya Angelou said, you know, I forget what you said, but you did, but I'll always remember the way you made me feel. But when I heard Rosemary Campbell-Stevens' phrase, global majority, oh, it made me feel good, it made me feel proud. It made me feel as big as I am. It made me feel as if I fit into my quite huge frame. When I always hear the word of minority, excluded, disenfranchised, impoverished, this, that, and the other, it might be the reality, yes, in one sense, but it makes me feel a weight on me. The fact is that we are 85% of the world population. And that is a truth that comes with a feeling that changes the way that I feel. But I also like another word, the other end of the spectrum, called race trauma. That is not something that is in common currency, because we don't always want to talk about the human impact of racism, because we don't always see it. If we're not experiencing it, then it's not something that we need to expose ourselves to. But when you wake up crying, when you can't focus, when your mind is in bits, where your thoughts can't form properly, yeah, you've been traumatized. And we do this to people every minute of every day in our organizations across the country. There are silent victims all around us, surviving somehow, but certainly not thriving. So language is important, and it's important that those who have the experience, understand, have expertise, begin to use the language differently. And there's some old words like racism that need to come back into play, because we have words like bias. It makes it sound not as serious as racism. It's like, you know, it's like when people talk about white lies, isn't it? Somehow white lies are not supposed to be that bad. Unconscious bias is not supposed to be that bad, because we all have it. When you're on the receiving end of it, and, you know, microaggression, who says it's micro? Yeah, who says it's micro? Just because it happens every day, it doesn't mean it's small. It doesn't mean it has a small impact. It's tearing people apart. So language is important. And, you know, one of the things, if you do the cultural intelligence assessment, one of the things they score in there is language. Because when you speak another language, you can't do that without having some understanding of the culture that goes with that language. And so the language of equity is important for us to grasp, because as we begin to embrace it and understand it, we will begin to understand something of the culture and the experiences that lie behind that. But shortcut to excellence, shortcut to competency, shortcut to capability in this area doesn't exist. And it's only those who are prepared to do the real work, to understand, empathize. One of the things we talk about on the program a lot is empathy, because we know that the ability to empathize across cultural difference is very, very hard. And so there are 3 levels of empathy, and most of us stay at the bottom. Cognitive empathy, it goes on in here. It's a thought. So we'll read the framework, and we'll take the language, and we'll understand, okay, it says that I need to do A, B, C, and D. We do so without even feeling that. Yeah, it's all in here. But compassionate empathy requires us to feel it. We feel things. When we feel things, we are moved into action. And that's where we get that positive action hesitancy occurring. And you'll notice that I've used those two words together. There is a hesitancy that prevents people from taking action. So we need to get to that empathetic
Thank you, Carol.
compassion.
I can see Joan's got her mic open, so I think Joan wants to ask a question. Or
Yeah,
comment
I'm reflecting what's coming through,
yeah.
Carol, and really good to hear you. Anybody who hasn't heard Carol, you need to hear her. I can listen to you all day. We got so much to pack in. One thing that will, you said quite a lot there, and one thing that will make us work together to fight is really what I'm looking for, because we can talk about the supporters, the allies, the bystanders. It's actually important that we all empower ourselves. We're at different phases within this journey. But to a lot of people out there, you're seeing people who are actually talking about experiences they're going through now. How do we coalesce so that we can be on one page rather than, you know, using the tools that have been given to us?
I think that there's something about compassionate empathy that, as I say, moves you from mind to feeling to action. And wherever we stand around this horrific issue, you know, some of us have experienced racism so much we're actually numb. Yeah? So we have to then reawaken ourselves to what it is, but know that we're not doing it alone. I think there is an energy around this at this time, and I recognize that the work that yourself and Hilary has done is landmark, and I don't think people recognize how important it is, but it has laid down a foundation to embed in the system, because this thing is systematic, embed in the system a framework to make sure that everybody has to, it's no longer optional. You have to do this. And I think recognizing the importance of that, the what of the things we do with getting to equity is the how. So regardless of whether you're a white leader, you're a global majority leader, you're a global majority whoever, we do the work to support people to actualize this into reality. And I think that's where we need to recognize there's a journey. So we know the what, the how we do it is important, and that's where we try to walk alongside one another on their own personal leadership journey to get to equity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to more questions, and we'll field them to you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Really, really powerful, and you can see from the chat, I think you always land well with our audience. Now I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who's going to take us on a journey, looking back, moving forward. So I invite Wayne to take over the space.
I think we've got about 5 minutes for this. I know we want to hear about the case, so thank you, Wayne.
Oh, sorry. Right. Okay. Well, I will do a rapid whiz through then. So I'm Wayne Farrar. I'm the co-coordinator of the Confed's BME Leadership Network. So let me make sure I've got this. Are you seeing this?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
Great.
Yep.
And I was going to look back at just share some thoughts on coming on where Carol left off. Really, I'm not an expert, okay, and I'm not here to represent everybody's views. So this is a very personal reflection on 45 years worth of anti-racist campaigning, and I just wanted to share some thoughts on what the reality of racism is. And I think the purpose of racism is to control the behavior of white people. For black and brown people, guns and tanks are sufficient. Racism, and I think this builds on Hilary's point about the racism as a pandemic, and this is just putting in a little bit of context of exactly how racism makes you sick and the actual physiology and biology of that process. And it's really the exposure to racism that actually leads to the physiological changes that plays out in a whole range of health outcomes and impacts. But just to give us a context, And over the next few months, we're going to be asked to do some celebrating. Okay, we're going to be asked to celebrate the 75th year of the NHS. And we're also going to be asked to celebrate the 75th year since the arrival of the Empire Windrush. But what's interesting is when we're going to be asked to celebrate that, first of all, let's recognize how close those things happen together, okay? Because let's be clear, it was always understood that there would be no NHS unless workers were going to be imported from the Empire, okay? And when we're being asked to celebrate Windrush Day, for me, it's important to note the language, because what's missing there is the word empire. Yeah, and when we lose that understanding that it was the Empire Windrush, not something just arrived, but the Empire Windrush arrived from the Empire, and it brought workers from the Empire to respond to Britain's need to reconstruct after the war. That word empire is important that we remember that, because that teaches us a lot about the NHS origins in science, okay, in the scientific method, in the Enlightenment. And it was in there, in those forefathers of the scientific method, who brought us racism and scientific racism as a way to justify colonial expansion and the slave trade, okay? And Linnaeus, who was the sort of the scientific godfather here, was the one who introduced these taxonomies that we are still using today to describe who is the racialized group. And here they are, but the one that's missing is obviously, no surprise, that it was the Europeans, okay? And it's that white-eyed, gentle, inventive, okay, and these taxonomies lie at the base of the racism that we're dealing with. And also when we leave out the empire from it, we leave out the history of what happened to those communities, okay? And I would describe them first as everybody who arrived from the empire arrived as a British citizen. They were made into a second-class citizen once they got here. And to give a couple of examples, I'll just give one example. You see the way in which the NHS and the medical establishment were involved in that was, you see, through the introduction of the state enrolled nurse and the state registered nurse role. So the state registered nurse role was for white nurses and carried better salaries and better benefits. The state enrolled nurse was reserved for those who were coming from the empire. And then once they were made into second-class citizens, they were soon made into from citizens back to immigrants again. And there you have to look at the 1961 Commonwealth Immigrants Act, which introduced for the first time a quite clear colour bar into British legislation. Okay, if you were from the if you were from the old Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Rhodesia, you were regarded as partial and therefore had a right to residency. If you were from the new Commonwealth, in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, you were considered to be a non-citizen anymore, okay? And what that did was actually set out the framework within which these different communities came together to resist the racism that they experienced. And I remember very much growing up with me and my friends quickly understood that there were two major sports that we had to be dealing with as young people walking around town. And that was nigger hunting and packy bashing, okay? And so we learned from that it didn't matter where or when your grandparents or your forefathers came to this country, the reality of our experience wasn't that we were all the same, but we all had one fight that we had to contend with. And that kind of led very quickly into some real disturbances that people might remember around Britain in the early 80s, which all focused around Brixton and led to what was perhaps the first major report on how Black communities were to be controlled in Britain, the Scarman Report. And the Scarman Report introduced the idea of ethnicity, okay? Until then, it was the description was always about race. And suddenly you introduce the idea of ethnic disadvantage, okay? And ethnic disadvantage, Scarman told us, needed to be responded to by a load of ethnic programs. so that we could have a multicultural society as long as the ethnics were always vibrant. Okay. And now we see the last of the empire story is in what we're being asked to celebrate on Windrush Day is a system of the hostile environment, whereby policy, the charging policy around migrants is, according to the government's own data, unfit for purpose, harmful for public health, and incentivizing racial profiling. And I think when we're talking about we're against racism, the language of racism, I think we have to ask, does the NHS actually any longer have the right to claim that it's doing what Nye Bevan set it up to do, providing universal care to all in need, when it leaves Black and British citizens and migrants alike to die as a result of complying with a racist policy? And Bevan himself actually addressed this whole issue. And this is actually a quote from his 1952 book. One of the consequences of the universality of the British health service is the free treatment of foreign visitors. This has given rise to a great deal of criticism, most of it ill-informed, and some of it deliberately mischievous. The whole agitation has a nasty taste. Instead of rejoicing in the opportunity to practice a civilized principle, conservatives have tried to exploit the most disreputable human emotions in this among many of the other attempts to discredit socialized medicine. And I think if we look at the conversation that's been going on since the Gary Lineker incident, we're seeing on one side how true that remains of the way the conversation is going and the language that's being used. And I think what we see for those of us who lived through the 60s and 70s is the triumph of Enoch Powell's legacy that goes well beyond his Rivers of Budge speech. Because what he did was actually set out what are the key pillars we now accept. Immigration is essentially a conspiracy by the elites against the masses. Integration is impossible. Racial hatred is natural. White people are the real victims of racism. And the final solution must always be to reduce the numbers. And so people don't think I'm being party political here. I'll just quote my old mentor, Stephen Andon. What Powell says today, the Tories say tomorrow, and Labour legislates the day after. So I'll whiz through this now, Bruno.
Okay, so we just got 30 seconds. Sorry.
Okay. So racism is a social construct. Okay. Racism is an ideology of ascriptive difference. It normalizes inequalities by naturalizing groups. Race and ethnicity are categories of ascriptive difference. They're nothing real to us. You don't have a race or an ethnicity. That is ascribed to you by the society in which you live. And racialization is the process by which that is done. And just finish up, race is not a prerequisite for racism. It's the other way around. Racism being an action. It is acting on that double standard based on an ascribed or putative ancestry. Racism, in other words, is not an attitude, nor bigotry, nor prejudice. It is an act, and it is the repetition of that act of racism that makes race look like a real entity. So that's my thoughts.
And you and Carol could have the whole hour. So thank you so much. There'll be a lot of questions, but I want to really thank you for just giving us some of that history. And, you know, we need to have a debate. Some might think, no, I don't agree with that. We need that space to actually talk and look at evidence as opposed to what's in our head. So we'll come back to Q&A at the end. Thank you, Wayne. Bruno, over to you to introduce the RCN, your other RCN colleagues.
My other RCN colleagues. Thank you, Joan. So many of you would have seen in the press and on Twitter and all the social media the case that's really been highlighted recently. So we've invited our colleagues here to talk you through some of the principles, the key principles of how they've used language, how they've used the legislation and their experience in a casework to be able to come to the decision that the court did a few weeks ago. So I introduced to you Stephanie Dunn, who's original director, and Alan White. I don't know if Ferguson is here. I haven't looked through the chat actually. Is he around?
Yes, he is.
He is. So we need to find him and let Ferguson, if you can put your camera on, please. And I give, there you go. And I give the floor to you. Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. Hello. So, Stephanie, do you want to just chip in and just to say a quick something, or do you want me to just carry on? You're on mute, Stephanie.
The way we plan to play this is for Alan, who's a senior officer, to start to describe how we actually got involved in the case and some of the challenges that he faced and overcame. And then the referral to Ferguson and the effort that had to be made to get to the level of proof, if you like, to achieve a legal remedy that has been a landmark legal remedy, and hopefully it encourages and supports other members who just feel that it's not something that they can or want to do. It's not an easy journey. And I'm just going to wrap up with some of the strategic conversations we've been having in the Northwest and some of the ongoing activity that we're engaged in as a region to ensure that this is not a one-off. And it certainly isn't, because Ferguson and the legal team have got a strong track record. And in fact, 40% of his legal cases are around race discrimination. So it tells you about how our reps, our officers actually work to identify, because they're at the front end, and then how they actually have conversations with and work up a legal referral. So Ferguson and his team have got a likelihood of success in pursuing it. So, but I'll just come in at the end. Thanks a lot, Alan.
Okay, everybody. So I've not got any slides. Well, we haven't got any slides that we're going to kind of be running through. So we're going to just kind of talk this through, really. So, so as Stephanie was saying, my name is Alan White. I'm a registered nurse myself. Been on the register since 1987, and I've been supporting members of the Royal College of Nursing in various guises over the years for about 25 years. And this, for me, is what probably the biggest kind of case from a point of view of media and public attention that I've been involved with, from a point of view of the result. So long before we get to anywhere near employment tribunals or even ACAS, there's a process we go through that I'm the kind of starting point with that, really. So the person that we're talking about, obviously, might as well use her name because it's not a secret. It's out there. So Michelle, she came to the RCN, starting off through our RCN Direct, where you basically call our RCN Direct number. You talk to an advisor. That you explain what the issue is, and then that advisor will decide whether it's something they can deal with there and then, or whether it needs to get referred to the regional office. Obviously, with Michelle's case, that had to come through to the regional office, and me as the senior official for Greater and Central Manchester, I then get first sight of that, if you like, and I make a decision as to whether I'm going to allocate that to one of our local reps or one of the officers that I line manage, or whether I'm going to deal with that case myself. And on this occasion, I just chose to support Michelle myself. So this was around October 2020, something like that, at the height of COVID. So Michelle came to us with quite a lot of issues, really. And just to kind of give a brief oversight, it was like being overlooked for promotions, being overlooked for secondments. It was not being included in invites for training events or social events. And also one of the things that was quite kind of evident to me was the fact that she suddenly just saw one of her white colleagues, her email signature had suddenly changed to represent elements of what Michelle's job was. So there's quite a lot of stuff there, and that's only a kind of a snippet of. There was a big list of things, obviously, that Michelle was aggrieved about. Now, if you look at those events on their own, some of you might think, well, that seems quite trivial or doesn't look too bad. But what you've got to look at is the kind of what we call a drip effect of all these things building up gradually to the point that somebody's been worn down with it, really. They've been trying to address it, with conversations with management, with conversations with colleagues and so on and so forth, and that's not getting anywhere. And eventually Michelle came to the decision that she was going to lodge a formal grievance. Now that's a big step to take for somebody that's in a senior position. It's not a decision that is taken lightly, because obviously in essence you're kind of going up against the organisation that you work for, and you can kind of take the sense that you're kind of putting your reputation on the line, really. So it was a big decision for Michelle to go forward with that grievance. Now, from my point of view, my role is then to support her through that grievance process and to look at the events that we've got and how we can kind of build a grievance and build something that we're going to present to the employer. One of the key things with Michelle's case is that a lot of the events that she talked about, well, virtually all of the events, to be fair, were what we would say are out of time. Now, what I mean by that is we have 3 months less 1 day from the date the act complained of. If you're looking at taking a case to ACAS, early conciliation tribunals. So the vast majority, if not all of those issues for Michelle were out of time. And that's because she had been trying to get things resolved herself. She had been trying to move things along with discussions and so on and so forth. And that had been unsuccessful. So therefore, we were kind of out of time for those things. However, still important that I was involved in that grievance process because we need to look at how we're going to try and build a remedy. Now, being fair, and being open and honest, the grievance itself, I would say, was a little bit, not a little bit, it was hugely disappointing in the way that the organisation handled it. I didn't feel that they were taking it seriously in any way, shape or form. I felt they were trying to trivialise a lot of the issues that Michelle was raising. And we eventually then, the people that kind of, you present this to the investigating officer, they then go away and do their own investigations. They go and speak to people that Michelle has mentioned. They go and dig out the evidence, maybe minutes from meetings or emails or so on and so forth. But we only really have what the member has. We don't get to see a lot of information at this time. And I'll just talk about that briefly in a few minutes as well. But we got the outcome from the grievance, and it was, some elements were partially upheld, which basically just means, I do apologise, you might hear my stupid dog in the background now and again. Some of the elements were partially upheld, some were, well, the majority were not upheld. Now, partially upheld is just basically meaning, well, yeah, we kind of agree a little bit with you there, but, we don't think it was as bad as you were making out kind of attitude. But the most of the stuff was not upheld, and they said that there was insufficient evidence to support really what Michelle was saying. So on the back of that, I thought, I'm not happy with this. I wasn't happy with it in any way, shape or form. So that's really when I think I want to get somebody from our legal services team to take a look at this. And then what I do is I build a referral. The thing about the referral, from a point of view of sending it to legal, it's an electronic system, but we need to make sure we get all the evidence that we've possibly got. So I needed to get the likes of Michelle to do as a written statement that I could show to Ferguson. We'll also need to have a look at the information that we've got from submitting the grievance and also from what we've got from the actual outcome as well. So off that then goes to our legal services team to have a look at, on the back of me saying, I'm not happy with this, I want you to have a look at this. Is there any grounds for a potential discrimination claim? And one of the things I was focusing on was the fact that I felt the grievance itself was an act that we could complain of, because it was just pretty farcical, really, to be fair. So I think that was something that had to be looked at. And I'll be honest with you, at first blush, when Ferguson had a look at this, our legal team had a look at this, we weren't confident that it had a pretty strong chance of success at tribunal. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a potential claim. We have our own qualifying criteria, and we have to be certain as an organisation that it has at least a 51% chance of success at tribunal. Being a membership-led organisation and all that kind of stuff, obviously we need to be mindful of funds and things like that. So the case came then back, and Ferguson saying, not quite sure we've got enough information here as it stands, and we wouldn't support on this, at this time. So what I then need to do, I have to go back to the member, to Michelle. Obviously, she was obviously disappointed, and probably a little bit confused as to why. And we then have to kind of push on with the internal process, and that internal process is to go through an appeal process. Now, the appeal process went ahead, and we got a fantastic outcome from that appeal process. And it's the only time in my times of supporting members that the actual CEO of an organisation has written an apology to somebody and said, we cannot apologise enough for the way that you've been treated. And the documentary evidence from the outcome from the appeal was outstanding. And on the back of that, I thought, I'm going to get them to have another look at this, because this to me is ticking all the boxes from a point of view of them saying, we got this wrong, we treated you appallingly, and that can't happen again. Now, Michelle had in the background been doing her own work from a point of view of where she wanted to escalate this. So we give advice to say, at this time, we don't feel there's a strong enough case, but you can go to ACAS, you can lodge for early conciliation, and the members go off and do that. But there are many occasions when members go and do that on their own behalf. They do it on off their own back. And we then still come back and review cases, and we still take cases on after they've already been lodged with ACAS, and even when we've already got a certificate and it's gone to even gone to an ET and even perhaps a preliminary hearing. And that's what happened on Michelle's occasion. But that's when our legal team had a look at it and thought, yeah, this has got a chance here, and we will support that. So from that point on, we then step in and we then start to liaise from a point of view of how we're going to take that forward. So that's my kind of bit done, really, just to kind of give you a background that it's not just about the employment tribunal and the legal process, it's about how do we get there even in the first place. So I'm going to hand it over to Ferg now, who's going to kind of talk you through the next bit.
Thanks, thanks, Alan. Yeah, just to sort of go over just Alan's last few comments. Like I say, sometimes, you know, when you're looking at these cases and you've got to justify support based on a criteria of 51% or more, it can be quite difficult. So, like I say, when the case first came to us, we were a bit concerned about that. But then when we saw the grievance appeal outcome, it seemed to us that there was no valid reason, or there was absolutely no reason why this respondent should have not found in Michelle's favour. Like Alan was saying, the grievance did uphold the majority of Michelle's complaints, but failed to find that there was any racism involved. And I'd encourage you all, if you get the chance, to read the judgment in the Cox case, because it's self-explanatory in everything, in every way. It just explains where NHS England went wrong, what happened. But over this case has gone over nearly 3 years, and we've still not got to the end of that process. We've still got to go to a remedy hearing later on in July 2023. But the judgment was effectively damning of NHS England in terms of the manner in which they dealt with Michelle's grievance and her grievance appeal. In fact, it went as far as to find that the grievance and grievance appeal were acts of a course of discriminatory conduct towards Michelle. And it was clear that this respondent, who, let's face it, is a flagship employer, paid for by public funds, went out of their way to try and wriggle out of their responsibilities by failing to uphold Michelle's grievance that she'd been subjected to race discrimination. Now, like I say, it's good to hear that the organisation has apologised at the highest level. But like I say, we often find a lot of organisations have got the policies, have got the qualifications from the courses that they've attended, but when push comes to shove, they're more concerned about protecting the organisation's reputation rather than upholding what is or what was a valid grievance. Like I say, I think we can all learn from what's happened in Cox, and it disappoints me that in 2023 we're still talking about these issues. And like I say, my plea is for organisations out there to practice what they preach, and really do, you know, deal with these grievances and grievance appeal processes properly. The other key thing in the context from my perspective was at the employment tribunal, the tribunal found that even though a lot of Michelle's complaints were out of time, so to speak, they were happy to extend the jurisdiction by exercising their discretion to include those acts on a just and equitable basis. So Michelle was able to rely on those events. But it's often the case that people come to us very late in the day, and a lot of what they complain of is historical. And in employment tribunal proceedings, it's very frustrating because, as Alan stated, you have 3 months less one day from the act complained of to make a claim via ACAS, and that doesn't give you much time. So in the Northwest, we're very proactive about supporting our members and protecting their statutory rights to make a claim, which allows us to give the employer more time to explain why or give us their response. And if we don't receive that response, then we lodge the claim at the Employment Tribunal to preserve our client's right to proceed. The advantage of doing that is that once you're in the Employment Tribunal process, and once you get through the preliminary matters, the respondent or the employer is required to give you full disclosure of everything that they have on that case, which is broader than the power that you've got, say, in a grievance. So in other words, they're required to give you all the evidence. And it's at that point that we make the call about whether we feel the case has a reasonable prospect of success or not. But even sometimes that can be fraught with difficulty, because you cannot predict at the Employment Tribunal how the evidence is going to be presented, who's going to be believed, who's credible. And one potent element of the judgment was that in this case, a very, very senior nurse's evidence was found to be not credible. In fact, she'd gone out of her way to mislead people. So, you know, and we couldn't have, whilst we knew that, we didn't realise what impact that was going to have when that manager was subjected to a day's cross-examination from an experienced barrister in discrimination claims. And I say that as well, it's picking horses for courses around counsel and barristers, because you can get a lot of people out there who'll say to you, oh yeah, I do all sorts of employment stuff. We only instruct specialist barristers who specialise in discrimination in these type of claims. Fortunately for us, over a 2-year period, we got the support that we needed. Michelle's witness statement took over 12 drafts before it was finally approved. We had our claim prepared, we were ready. And like I say, thankfully, we got an outstanding outcome for the member. It's sad in a way, because the people that were the perpetrators of the acts complained of and the people who investigated the grievance all got promoted, and Michelle's never going to nurse again. So whilst we can say we're very happy with the outcome, you know, it's not one that, you know, I'm going to sit there and say, yeah, this is fantastic, because ultimately it's led to a very senior nurse being made incapable of her working in her chosen profession in the prime of her life. And, you know, like I say, although NHS England are trying to build bridges, you know, to reassure Michelle, you know, and we thank them for that. And I'm sure that's done in, you know, with all good intentions. But like I say, in my practice, and I've got a few cases on the books at the moment where members have made complaints and, you know, complaints have been upheld. Oh, it's bullying, it's harassment, but it's not, nothing to do with your race. You know, and like I say, sometimes these organisations have got to grasp the nettle and they've got to practice what they preach. Because without that commitment, we can talk forever, and we can produce all these different types of flow charts and policies. But, you know, we really do need to make sure that we practice what we preach. And I'm very proud to work in the Northwest with Alan and with Stephanie and the officers, because without the officers, I would not get the referrals. And like I said earlier, we're very hot on discrimination claims of all different stripes: disability discrimination, sex discrimination, maternity discrimination, you name it, we're there. But we are very proud of the outcome. And I'd like to say, just commend the judgment to your reading. And let's hope that we can get a really good outcome for Michelle later on at the remedies hearing in July. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Ferguson. Thank you, Alan, for doing that. Stephanie, I think you just want to round up, and we want to leave time for questions. I've got my people in the chat who have got some questions that they do want to ask at the panel. So I really want to get some time in for that. Thank you. You're muted.
So I will be very quick. And for me, taking this right back to the language and the conversation that Wayne was leading with us and and Carol, I think when we need to think about what people say affects what they think and what they do. And we have seen, you know, in the wake of this case, the Secretary of State for Health ordering a crackdown on diversity jobs in the NHS amid a growing fury of woke box ticking, costing millions for the taxpayer. And that's despite the judgment that is incredibly damning. And, you know, they're relying on figures like it's more than 700,000 being spent on diversity jobs in the NHS in a single month. But it's a huge organisation employing a huge number of people from diverse backgrounds. And when they have the pay bill is 56.1 billion, 700,000 a month, you know, it's not a huge amount given this terrible state of play and the levels of discrimination that happen. It's almost trying to play it down. So he's planning a review and he's using language like bloated army of middle management. And they announced as part of their transformation a reduction of 35 to 40% of posts across the national workforce and transformation teams. And that includes Health Education England, NHS Digital, etc., etc. And NHS EDI came under significant scrutiny from ministers and sections of the media, criticising targets as wokery. And that really does undermine people's trust and confidence in being able to speak up, because there's a sense that you won't be believed. What you think, what you feel, what you've experienced won't be acknowledged or accepted. It appears that there's no longer a Director of Equality and Inclusion, and 7 teams, including those dedicated to the Workforce Race Equality Standard and the Workforce Disability Equality Standard processes, programs emerged into 3, training, policy and standards. And in reality, we see the work actually is just a tip of the iceberg, what we're seeing. And actually replacing those people with smaller number of roles and merging responsibilities does serve to undermine. And they're sending out, you know, a questionable message. And the thing that I found really concerning was, you know, there was a suggestion that there was a genuine question about how effective the national team has been in its current form. And they argued that it'd been undermined due to staff leaving and the hoops they had to jump through to get EDI taken seriously. And I think Alan and Ferguson have talked to that, but it'll be much harder without director oversight. So for me, in summary, when I read the article from the HSJ, there was significant use of language that I find quite repellent, for the want of a better word. And it explained to me very quickly why we have this sustained system of institutional racism and how dismantling it is such a challenge. And I've just put them into a couple of tables and I won't go through them all. But
okay, you've got about 30 seconds, so go ahead.
Okay, so very, very quickly, you know, they were saying things like, it's a non-story, racism's a non-story. They're talking about things like, let's get equality so woke. They don't think a reduction in this team is a problem. And they don't see the point of it, and that it's empire building for people who get jobs over Band 8. So what's coming across is a very dismissive use of language, and I think it's hard to get by that when you're trying to change hearts and minds in a system. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Stephanie. Now, I think our moderators have got some questions for the panel. So Ofra, Sarah, Chloe, have we got any?
I've got some here to read.
Okay,
I can
thank
read
you,
those
Joan.
quickly, and we're just looking for quite a short answer so we can get most in. First is, what are the most powerful and tangible actions that individuals can take to be anti-racist in their practice, and what actions would you advise for people leaving this event wanting to return to work to bring their colleagues together to tackle racism in their services? Now, I'm not going to ask who, just anyone who wants to kind of give a short answer. Some of these are very long actions that need to take place, but let's guide people. to where they might need to be.
One of the big things, Joan, is about having the confidence to have a conversation. And when we did the work around racism in the pandemic, that was one of the things that one of the people who contributed to the documentary said. It was hard for her to open the conversation about her experience, but once she did it, it opened up the floodgates. So I think we all need to take the opportunity.
Okay, anyone else? Helpful actions, and what action would you advise for people leaving this event and wanting to return to work to bring their colleagues together to tackle racism in their services?
I would advise it's not for the faint-hearted. It's not without cost. And sometimes you may be motivated to try to tackle it. You won't do it on your own. There are many of us that have been working on this for decades. So my advice would be find people who are working on this and put your shoulder to the wheel, but recognize where you need to be positioned to begin the dismantling, and look at your circle of influence, your circle of power. Start there. Start by seeing it, recognizing it, and speaking up. And sometimes it's about allowing yourself to recognize it first before you begin to articulate that to others.
Great. And before I ask this next question, I just want people to put in the chat. Feel free to not do so, but just put in the chat if you've actually been directly impacted by racism, or you've been a bystander, you've seen racism. Just a yes or a no. Because we have to validate this happens, and it happens at scale, and it happens in the most nuanced ways. We have to start validating it to directly counter this wokeism, which is awful, and we do need leadership. So I'm going to go on to the next question. How many racism complaints are downgraded to generalized bullying, grievances, etc.? There is a climate of denial in our services.
I'd say yes, there's a lot. Absolutely is a lot, without a shadow of a doubt. I think Ferguson touched on it. You know, you lodge grievances around racist discrimination or lots of elements of discrimination, and you just get stuff back. Well, they didn't do it on purpose. You know, they didn't mean it. This, that, and the other. And somebody put in the chat earlier, as I was just reading about, you know, people are just told to get all the jobs, and that's a harsh reality as well. Is that people, if they will either kind of face up to it and raise their head above the parapet and challenge it, or just for an easy life they'll just leave. And that's, you know, I don't want to say there's lots of people out there that go out to deliberately bully people, but there are some, and they get away with it because they're very good at it. And these are the people that you just think, I'm not going to go up against person A because they'll just get away with it. So they just walk away.
So there's a job of work to be done, isn't there?
The problem never gets addressed.
There's a job of work to be done. For nobody's going to raise this stuff, so we need to raise it with the supporters, with people out there who take the bravery of your influence, and that can look in very many different ways. We have influence, use it, but together. I'm not even going to have the last word. I think, Carol, just any brief comments, and then I'll go to Bruno to end the session. Please.
I think a number of important points have been raised. I think one of the key things, it is a landmark moment, Michelle Cox's case. And I hope that as a result of that, the RCN may review the 51% level. There are a mass of other people who have had similar experiences, but what it has done is brought those things that people think are everyday issues into the focus of racism and identified it as racism. So if anybody is unclear what racism is, have a look at that case and you will see what it is. And that means if you're a perpetrator or if you're a victim, so we're all clear that there will be no hiding place in the future.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Joan.
Sorry, Bruno, I just want to say everybody's bit, so many hands going up to say we've been impacted by racism. We will come back with what we do about that and get you guys involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan. And I think this collaboration of work between this partnership, I think we need to continue, because we can see from the participation in the chat, it is important, it is vital that we continue, not just a conversation piece, but some actions that come out of it. And Wayne, I think you've signposted, you've highlighted the RCN about something that we could do in relation to activating our power in this place. So certainly I will take that on. I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Stephanie, Alan, Ferguson, Carol, Hilary, and Sheila, who's now gone. So thank you so much. I want to say thank you to people behind the scene who we didn't get a chance to interact with. So Ofra, Sarah, Chloe, thank you so much for being there and making this a successful evening. But thank you for giving the time yourselves to talk to and listen to this important issue. I want to leave you with somebody that Carol mentioned earlier on, the words of this very special poet that we all know, spoken to by members of our NHS and members of the global majority. So with this, I'll bid you a very good night. If you're traveling, travel safe, but we will continue this conversation to build on actions that we can take forward. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Just thinking whether I shed the sound. I don't think I shed the sound, so I need to come back. I'm sorry.
You may write me down in history
with your bitter, twisted lies.
You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise.
Does my sassiness upset you?
Why are you beset with gloom?
Because I walk like I've got oil wells.
Bumping in my living room.
Just like moons and like suns.
With the certainty of tides.
Just like hopes springing high. Still, I rise.
Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes.
Shoulders falling down like teardrops.
Weakened by my soulful cries.
Does my haughtiness offend you?
Don't you take it awful hard.
'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines.
Digging in my own backyard.
You may shoot me with your words.
You may cut me with your eyes.
You may kill me with your hatefulness.
But still like air, I rise.
Does my sexiness upset you?
Does it come as a surprise?
That I dance like I've got diamonds.
At the meeting of my thighs.
Out of the huts of history's shame.
I rise.
Up from a past that's rooted in pain.
I rise.
I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide.
Welling and swelling I bear in the tide.
Leaving behind nights of terror and fear.
I rise.
Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear.
I rise.
Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave.
I am the dream and the hope of the slave.
I rise, I rise, I rise.